I poured every penny of my life savings into my son's dream, even sold my home for him. But the day he looked me in the eye, across a dinner table, and called me an extra mouth to feed, that's when my world shattered. What he didn't know was that while they were building an empire on my money, a quiet truth was about to surface, revealing a fortune that would make me the true queen of their empire. They called it a gift. The guest house stood bathed in the pale morning light, a deceptive picture of serenity. I'm Eleanor Vance, 64 years old, and now it felt less like a sanctuary and more like a carefully constructed cage. My days here were marked by an insidious chill, a cold that seeped not from the walls, but from the silence that now filled every corner of my life. It hadn't always been like this. Before, there was Arthur. His laughter had always been the antidote to any quiet. He was a man who saw constellations in spilled coffee, a gentle dreamer with a precise, almost scientific mind for numbers. He built our life brick by brick, then dollar by dollar, ensuring we had a nest egg, a solid foundation. But then, cancer came. My son, Marcus, had been distraught. His wife, Lydia, had offered comforting words, a warm hand on my arm. They had their own struggles then. Their restaurant, the Golden Spoon, was faltering. A dream, they called it, just needing a significant investment to truly shine. My entire life's savings, every last cent Arthur had so meticulously saved, went into that dream. Marcus, his eyes earnest, had promised, "Mom, we'll pay you back. Every single dollar?" Lydia had embraced me, a rare, genuine hug. "You'll always have a place with us, Eleanor. A comfortable home, a family." So I sold the modest two-bedroom bungalow Arthur and I had shared for 40 years. Too many memories haunted those rooms. Too many echoes of a life I could no longer touch. Marcus and Lydia, beaming, ushered me into the charming guest house, tucked discreetly at the back of their newly renovated, sprawling property. "Your own private space," Lydia had chirped, gesturing grandly with a sweep of her hand. Perfect for a quiet retreat. It seemed perfect then. A separate entrance, a small kitchenette, a cozy living area, a chance to heal. But the dust of their promises settled quickly. The guest house became a polite distance. I began making small meals for them, simple casseroles, thinking to ease their burden. Marcus and Lydia, always busy, always rushing, would praise my cooking over the phone, but the food would sit in their refrigerator for days, untouched. "Oh, Mom," Marcus would say, catching me with a casserole dish in hand. "We just picked up takeout. You should have called." The unsaid words hung heavy. "You're a burden. You didn't ask." I'd eventually throw the food out, the cold weight of the dish echoing the chill in the air between us. It was never a direct insult, not at first, just a gradual dimming of my presence, a dinner invitation for next week that never materialized, conversations in their main house that hushed abruptly when I stepped onto the porch. They would talk about their rising profits, their expanding empire, their lavish plans for the future, and I was merely a shadow, a silent witness to a prosperity I had funded, yet did not share. I'd catch Lydia's eye sometimes, a quick flicker of irritation, immediately masked by that too-sweet smile. "Everything all right, Eleanor?" she'd ask, her voice edged with feigned concern. "You seem a little quiet." Quiet. I had always been quiet, but now it felt like being muted, erased. The guest house grew colder as winter deepened. I mentioned it to Marcus, a hesitant complaint about the old insulation. He grunted, engrossed in his phone. "Just old wiring, Mum. We'll get to it." He never did. I bought a small electric heater. Its constant hum became my companion, a sad lullaby against the creeping cold, both physical and emotional. I ate less, cooked too much, and often stared at the empty chair across my small table, wishing for the echo of Arthur's laughter, the one comfort I could truly miss without shame. They were building an empire on my broken back. The Golden Spoon was booming, expanding into new locations. Marcus was a local celebrity, Lydia hosting glittering charity galas. My life's savings was the foundation. Yet I was more invisible than the chipping paint on the guest house walls. My name was never mentioned, my contribution never acknowledged. It was as if I had ceased to exist the moment my money entered their account. The final shattering blow landed, as betrayals often do, at the dinner table. I had, foolishly perhaps, made Arthur's favourite chicken pot pie again. The aroma, thick with memory, filled their formal dining room. Marcus sat across from me, scrolling on his phone, the blue light painting his face in stark relief. Lydia picked at her food, occasionally offering a dismissive glance at some video Marcus showed her. The air was thick, suffocating with unsaid things. Then, Marcus looked up, not at me, but around the room, as if addressing an unseen, judgmental audience. His voice, flat and unfeeling, sliced through the silence. "You know," he began, "maybe it's time we stop pretending this is temporary. We're not a charity." My breath caught. Lydia froze, her fork clinking against the plate. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "What do you mean?" I managed to ask, my voice a barely audible whisper. He smirked, a cruel twist of his lips. "I mean, how long is this supposed to go on? You're not working, you're not contributing. We've got bills. We didn't sign up for extra mouths to feed." The words hit me like physical blows, each one a precise, agonizing cut. Extra mouths to feed. After everything. I turned to Lydia, desperate, pleading for her to intervene, for a single word of defense. But she wouldn't meet my eyes. She just mumbled, picking at a loose thread on her napkin. "Maybe it's best if you find something more stable. For everyone's sake. Everyone's sake." The phrase echoed in the sudden, shattering silence. A final, damning confirmation of my erasure. My own daughter-in-law, sealing my fate. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I didn't even cry. The shock was too profound, the betrayal too absolute. I simply stood, the scrape of my chair unnaturally loud against the polished floor, and walked to my small room in the guest house. 2 suitcases. That's all I had left. I packed in a daze, stuffing clothes, a few old photos, a faded scarf of Arthur's. Each item a ghost of a life now utterly gone. I didn't even cry while I packed. The tears came later, much later. They waited until I stood outside their grand house, the streetlights casting long, mocking shadows. The wind bit through my thin coat, but the cold inside me was far worse. I had nowhere to go, no one to call. Marcus hadn't even bothered to walk me out. Lydia hadn't looked back. I remembered sitting on the curb for what felt like an hour, phone dead, heart dead, thinking, this is what it feels like to be erased. That night, I checked into a cheap motel, the kind where the wallpaper peeled and the vending machine outside my door hummed a melancholic tune. I lay awake, staring at the water-stained ceiling, wondering how everything could turn so cold, wondering what I had done to deserve this kind of abandonment. The next morning, I sent Marcus a text. "I understand. I love you always." No reply. I sent another a few days later, a simple check-in. Still nothing. The silence became a living thing, a hungry beast eating away at my hope. And then, the true desperation set in, deeper and more chilling than any cold. My world shrank. The motel room, with its peeling wallpaper and the drone of the vending machine outside, became my universe. Each day blurred into the next, a soft grey watercolour. I sent Marcus texts, simple words of hope, like pebbles dropped into an abyss. "I'm okay. Just wanted to know how you are." No reply. 2 weeks later, a heart emoji. Silence. I told myself he was busy, that Lydia was influencing him, twisting his thoughts. But the hope, once a steady flame, began to gutter. My money dwindled. I tried to find work, anything. Grocery stores, front desks, even a diner by the highway. But a grieving widow in her late 50s, with no recent work history, was always overqualified or not a good fit. The loneliness became a crushing weight, heavier than the shame that burned in my chest. I had poured my entire life into Marcus. How could he turn his back so easily? One evening, desperate for anything familiar, I opened the single box of keepsakes I'd brought from my old home. It was dusty, filled with faded photos, old letters. At the bottom, nestled amongst forgotten trinkets, lay a small, leather-bound book, my mother's diary. I hadn't looked at it in years, maybe ever, but something compelled me. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, the lamp casting a weak glow. Her handwriting, neat and looping, filled the pages. At first it was ordinary life. Then, an entry dated June. He came again today. Said he wished things were different, wished I could be his wife. But he has a family, a business, a name to protect. Eleanor will never know. She must never know. My breath hitched. I flipped further. He said he'd made arrangements. If anything ever happened to him, he'd ensure Eleanor had something. It won't be official, of course, but he promised me a trust, a letter. Said his lawyer, Mr. Goldstein, would know that name. The name resonated, a forgotten echo from a distant past, and for the first time in months, a sliver of forgotten history began to breathe again. Have you ever stumbled upon a truth that redefines everything you thought you knew about your past? The truth burned. My hands trembled, clutching the leather-bound diary. Eleanor will never know. But I did know. My breath caught in my chest, a desperate gasp for air. I read the entry again, then again, words blurring through unshed tears. My entire life, a carefully constructed illusion. A quiet mother, a dedicated father, a simple, ordinary past. Now, shattered, I flipped through more pages, a frantic search for answers. Entries hinted at clandestine meetings, hushed conversations, small sums of money my mother desperately needed but tried to refuse. He was always referred to by initials, HJS. But then, a later entry, dated February. He said he'd made arrangements. If anything ever happened to him, he'd ensure Eleanor had something. It won't be official, of course. It's too dangerous. But he promised me a trust. A letter. Said his lawyer, Mr. Goldstein, would know that name. Goldstein. The name echoed. A faint whisper from a world I didn't know. It took me 2 days, huddled over the motel's shared computer, my fingers fumbling with the keys, to find him. Leonard Goldstein, a retired estate lawyer, still listed under a private firm in Dallas. I didn't call. My hands shook too much. My voice would betray the raw nerve of my discovery. Instead, I wrote a letter. A real, handwritten letter. The kind people used to send when words carried more weight than digits. I explained who I was, who my mother had been, my desperate plea for a conversation. 2 weeks later, the phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. Eleanor Vance? A voice crackled through the cheap phone. Old, gravelly. This is Leonard Goldstein. My heart hammered. He knew. I always wondered if you'd reach out someday, he said, his voice softer, almost a whisper. There's something you need to see. I took a Greyhound bus to Dallas the next morning. My suitcase was half packed, just in case he was some con artist. The bus swayed, a metal coffin carrying me towards an unknown truth. Doubt gnawed at me. Was this foolish? Was I chasing a ghost, a delusion born of grief and desperation? But the words in the diary, the forgotten promise, tugged me forward. She must never know. I knew now. When I finally stepped into his office, the quiet, heavy air pressed in on me. Old books lined the walls. Dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight. It smelled of aged paper and unspoken stories. Mr. Goldstein was as old as his office, his eyes kind but weary. He didn't offer a dramatic speech. He simply reached into a drawer and placed a sealed envelope on his large mahogany desk, yellowed, fragile, addressed simply, "To my daughter, Eleanor Louise." My breath hitched. The world tilted. The name on the envelope scrawled in an elegant, unfamiliar hand, Harold James Sterling, the founder of Sterling Energy, one of the biggest oil firms in Central Texas, a man whose face I'd seen in newspaper clippings all my life, a man with a family, a name, a legacy. I couldn't read the whole letter at once. Tears blurred the ink. He admitted everything: the affair, the regret, the silent love. In the event of my death, I have insured a portion of my personal assets, untraceable through my estate, are to be delivered to you via Mr. Goldstein. You are my blood, and though I was too much a coward to claim you in life, I claim you now in death. Mr. Goldstein slid a folder across the table. Bank accounts, a modest investment portfolio, ownership papers, titles. The total value, a little over $1 million. I stared at the papers, then at him, the truth settling over me like a long-awaited rain. "This is real," I whispered. He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "It's yours? Always was." My heart thundered, not because of the money, but because for the first time in my life I felt chosen, seen. I was not a burden. I was not erased. I was blood. And I wondered, what would it feel like to finally live a life not defined by what others took, but by what was rightfully yours? The world felt different. I didn't scream or laugh or break down. I simply sat there in Leonard Goldstein's quiet office, the yellowed letter from Harold James Sterling trembling in my hands. $1 million. The number itself was a distant hum, almost irrelevant. What truly thundered in my heart was the confession. You are my blood, and though I was too much a coward to claim you in life, I claim you now in death. My father, a man whose public life I had seen from afar, whose name adorned buildings, now in death, reaching out to claim me. For the first time in my 64 years, I felt chosen, seen. Not a burden, not an afterthought, but a direct, undeniable claim. That night, back in the motel room that now felt impossibly small, impossibly grimy, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, just as I had for months. But this time, the shadows on the stained tiles danced with a new light. A quiet smile spread across my face. They thought they had discarded me. They thought I was done, but they had no idea. I wasn't broken. I was simply getting started. I didn't rush back to Austin. Something profound had shifted inside me, a seismic tremor beneath the quiet surface I'd always presented. I was no longer just Eleanor, the forgotten mother. I was someone new, someone who had been lied to her entire life and finally saw the truth. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't drowning in the familiar shame that had clung to me like a shroud. I was breathing in clarity, pure and cold. I stayed in Dallas for a few more days, not in the same motel. I used some of the newly accessible funds to book a small, respectable room in a boutique hotel. Clean sheets and silent walls, a stark contrast to the peeling wallpaper I'd grown accustomed to. I simply walked, through neighborhoods I'd only glimpsed from a bus window, sipping coffee in quiet cafes, watching people live their lives, people who hadn't been tossed aside like unwanted trash. And for the first time, I didn't envy them. I studied them. I wondered who among them wore smiles that masked heartache, who had been betrayed, who had clawed their way back from being invisible. Leonard Goldstein, true to his word, had given me more than an inheritance. He had given me time. Time to process, time to breathe, time to understand what I now held in my hands. It wasn't just wealth, it was power. And I, the quiet woman who'd always deferred, always sacrificed, had no idea what to do with it. Yet the humiliation I'd endured, the profound sense of abandonment, had a way of hardening into fuel. When I finally returned to Austin, I didn't go back to the motel. I booked a short-term rental downtown, just off South Congress. A modern, quiet space that smelled of lemon polish instead of stale cigarettes, the kind of place Marcus and Lydia would never imagine me affording. I started dressing differently too. Not flashy, but more polished, more deliberate. Simple, tailored clothes, a new haircut that framed my face with a quiet confidence. I was becoming invisible in a new way, the kind of invisible that allows you to observe, to listen, to move through the world unseen, yet seeing everything. I spent hours on the rental's fast internet, watching YouTube videos on personal finance, real estate contracts, the intricacies of property law. I learned the language of business, not because I wanted to build an empire, but because I wanted to protect myself. I would never be powerless again. The feeling of financial vulnerability had been a constant ache since Arthur passed, an ache Marcus and Lydia had so ruthlessly exploited. Now, that ache was gone, replaced by a quiet hum of resolve. I scrolled through real estate listings, my mind sharp, my focus unwavering, and then I saw it. A listing that felt like destiny, a quiet whisper that turned into a roar. An old apartment building, a little rundown, but structurally sound, listed on a real estate auction site. The location, the exact complex where Marcus and Lydia lived. My heart pounded, not with rage, but with a cold, clear sense of purpose. I sat there, staring at the screen, and knew this wasn't about revenge. This was about reclaiming. This was about finally taking control of the one place they thought they ruled. What do you do when the universe hands you the exact tool to balance the scales, not with fire, but with quiet, absolute precision? The listing felt like destiny. It was an old apartment building in East Austin, a little rundown but structurally sound, its facade hinting at decades of stories. The location was what seized me, the exact complex where Marcus and Lydia lived. My heart pounded, not with the wild drum of rage, but with a cold, clear sense of purpose. It was listed as distressed, the owner defaulting on property taxes. The auction was scheduled in 2 weeks. I didn't hesitate. I called Leonard Goldstein first. His voice, steady and calm, was a balm. "Buying properties at auction can be tricky, Eleanor," he advised. "But with your resources and the right legal structure, it's certainly possible to operate discreetly. Discreetly." The word resonated with my newfound approach. Under Mr. Goldstein's expert guidance, we moved swiftly. He established a new entity for me, an anonymous shell company named Aegis Properties. The name felt right. A shield? A silent protection against the world that had cast me out. We filed the paperwork, transferred the funds, every step quiet, precise. It felt like I was learning a new language, the language of power, of legal maneuverings that could reshape worlds without a single raised voice. The auction came and went with an almost anticlimactic quietness. No gavel-pounding drama, no tense bidding wars. It was all electronic, a series of clicks and confirmations. I sat in my rental, watching the process unfold on my laptop, a cup of now cold tea beside me. When the final notification flashed across the screen, "Congratulations, you are the winning bidder," I felt a profound shift, not an explosion of triumph, but a deep, settled calm. And just like that, legally, quietly, entirely under the radar, I owned the building where Marcus and Lydia lived. The building where they kicked me out with 2 suitcases and a hollow excuse, where they humiliated me in my lowest moment. I remember sitting at my desk that night, the screen casting a pale glow on my face, looking at the digital deed. I whispered aloud, the words a soft current in the still air. "Let's see how Marcus likes paying rent to a mouth he couldn't feed." It wasn't about money, not entirely. It was about pride. Marcus was a man who needed to feel in control, and I had just pulled the rug out from under him, silently, decisively. A month later, the notification letters were sent out to all tenants, standard procedure. Rents would be reassessed, lease terms reviewed. But for Marcus and Lydia, the new amount was triple, not double, triple market value, plus overdue fees for their previous rent agreement. I knew it would hit them like a dam, a hurricane in their carefully constructed world. I didn't need to see it to know. I could almost feel their rage from miles away. Marcus must have exploded. I could almost hear his shouting, his indignant demands. Lydia, frantic, trying to calm him. But it wasn't about the money. Not for them, not really. It was about control, about the subtle, invisible hand that had suddenly reached into their perfect life and squeezed. 2 days after the notices went out, my phone vibrated. A familiar number. It was the first time Lydia had called since the night I left. I watched it ring, then allowed it to go to voicemail. Her voice, when it came through the phone's tinny speaker, was laced with confusion, a hint of panic. "Mum, I don't know if you heard, but something weird's going on. Our rent just shot up, like, a lot. Marcus is losing it. I don't know. Can we talk? Can we?" I didn't respond. This wasn't about vengeance. This was about gravity. They needed to feel the weight of their choices. Every action has a consequence, and some consequences arrive silently, disguised as a rent increase. I drove by the building once late at night. Their lights were on. I could see shadows moving behind the curtains, Lydia pacing, Marcus yelling, his silhouette unmistakable. I watched them for a minute, then drove away. Part of me felt hollow, part of me felt vindicated, and part of me, the part that still remembered the little boy I raised, still hurt like hell. Even now, knowing what I knew, holding what I held, I would have given anything to be invited back in. Not to the apartment, but to my son's heart. But I knew that wasn't possible, at least not yet, so I stayed silent. I waited, because sometimes the loudest justice is the one that doesn't say a word, and I wasn't finished yet. Have you ever wished for something so deeply that when it finally arrived, it felt both liberating and strangely quiet, almost anticlimactic? The world shifted. I didn't realize how much I had changed until I saw Lydia at the grocery store 3 weeks after the rent increase. She didn't see me. I was 2 aisles over, hidden behind a towering display of discounted cereal, a silent observer in her unfolding misery. She looked tired, not just tired, but utterly worn down. Her hair was tied back sloppily, the way she used to do only after a long, hard cry. Her shopping cart was half empty, mostly filled with cheap staples, rice, eggs, a few off-brand cans. My stomach clenched. I should have walked away. I didn't. I followed her through the store, keeping my distance, my heart pounding a strange, unsettling rhythm, like I was doing something deeply wrong. She paused in front of a small box of macaroni and cheese, then looked down at her phone. A text from Marcus, perhaps? Her shoulders sank. She put the box back. That simple action, the quiet relinquishing of a small comfort, broke something inside me. Not because I was spying, but because I remembered the little girl who used to run to me crying when she scraped her knee. The one who asked me every night to check for monsters under her bed. And now she was living with one. I drove home that day, the silence in my car heavy with ghosts. I sat on the couch for hours, staring out the window, watching the world move on, unconcerned. I thought about how life had twisted us into strangers, how a debt of gratitude had morphed into this brutal lesson. But I reminded myself, this wasn't punishment. This was consequence. And consequence, I knew, was long overdue. I had plans now, not just for the building, but for a quiet, slow chess match. Every move calculated, every step thoughtful. With Aegis Properties fully in place and the property legally transferred, I began the upgrades, small ones at first, fixing the persistent leaks, replacing broken locks, installing new, brighter hallway lighting. Marcus was too distracted by the rent increase, yelling at the property manager by email, demanding answers to notice. He still hadn't figured out the true owner. I knew how his ego worked. He wasn't going to move. He'd see that as defeat. And Lydia? She'd follow his lead, as she always did, trapped in the orbit of his rage. So I kept going. I changed the property signage, had a discreet security camera installed near the lobby, and updated the tenants' mailboxes, all under the name of my company, Aegis Properties. No one knew who was behind it. I was a phantom, an unseen force. Then came the official notice. Mandatory annual inspections for all units. Marcus sent a furious response through the tenant portal, filled with empty threats and self-righteous indignation. I smiled, reading it. He was unraveling, and I didn't need to lift a finger. Meanwhile, I was becoming someone I barely recognized. My hair was styled differently now, sharper. My clothes, simple but tailored. I walked with a purpose, not the shuffling gait of a defeated woman. I started joining small business meetups under a pseudonym. Eleanor Vance was gone. I learned the ropes of real estate, building quiet connections. No one asked about my past. They only saw a composed woman with sharp eyes and ready capital. The best disguise, I was learning, was the simple truth they couldn't see. One morning, I passed Lydia and Marcus in the parking lot as I exited a tenant meeting. I kept my sunglasses on, hair tucked into a sleek bun, a folder of documents clutched to my chest. Lydia barely glanced at me, distracted, her eyes shadowed. Marcus didn't recognize me at all. He just grumbled past, deep in conversation with his phone. Later that night, I sat in my living room sipping tea, thinking about how strange it felt to walk right past your own child and be invisible. Not because you're weak, but because you're stronger than they remember. They couldn't see me now because they only knew the version of me they used to control. And that woman was gone. Lydia's soft, hesitant voicemails continued, each one a fragile thread of desperation. "Hi, Mum. Just wanted to see if maybe you had time to talk. I know things have been complicated." I didn't return them, not out of cruelty, but because I needed her to feel the void she had created. And every time doubt tried to creep in, a cold whisper of my old self, I opened my mother's diary. I read those words over and over again. Eleanor will never know. She must never know. But I did know now. And with that knowledge came a kind of armor no one could tear through. I was no longer the woman begging to stay under their roof. I was the woman who owned it. Is there a moment in your life when you realized your silence wasn't weakness, but your greatest strength? I always believed revenge wasn't about getting even. It was about balance. But when I saw Marcus's email response to the rent increase, a small flicker of satisfaction, undeniable and sharp, lit inside me. The subject line screamed, "This is absolutely unacceptable." The body was a furious torrent. "This must be a mistake. Tripling our rent is extortion. I demand to speak to whoever owns this damn dump. We've lived here for 3 years and never been late once. This is robbery." He signed it Marcus D. Vance, like his name meant something. I read the email 3 times, savoring the raw indignation, then forwarded it to my property manager with a simple, clinical note. "Please respond using Standard Clause C regarding market rate adjustments. No special exceptions." Marcus wasn't just angry. He was stunned. His arrogance, a lifetime of easy entitlement, never made room for the idea that someone could outmaneuver him. He was so accustomed to being in control that the thought of answering to a faceless landlord drove him mad. He expected a name, a target for his fury. He got silence. Lydia tried calling me again that same night. The voicemail was different. No pretense of politeness. "Mom, I know you're not picking up, but I really need to talk to you. Things are rough right now. Marcus is upset. He's taking it out on everything. We're trying to figure things out. I miss you. I do." Her voice cracked at the end. A raw sound of desperation. For a moment, my fingers hovered over the screen. I could call her back, offer comfort, tell her it would be okay, that I'd fix everything. But I didn't. Because it wasn't okay. And I couldn't keep fixing the messes she helped create. Lydia had stood by as he threw me out like I was nothing more than a bill they couldn't afford. And now that the pressure was on her, she remembered how to dial my number. No. Let her sit with the silence a little longer. The next week, I authorized additional upgrades on the property. New exterior paint, brighter hallway lighting, landscaping improvements that brought a fresh greenness to the once neglected grounds. Marcus's exorbitant rent wasn't just a punishment, it was funding improvements for all the other tenants. A quiet irony he couldn't see. Everyone else benefited. He just couldn't. He started leaving angry notes under the property management office door. The water pressure sucks. Trash is piling up. If this is what we're paying for, it's a joke. Every note went unanswered. Lydia stopped leaving voicemails. She started texting instead. Short, desperate ones. Hey, can we talk? I really need you. Then silence again. Meanwhile, I watched the bank statements roll in. Aegis Properties was stable, profitable. The other tenants were quiet, respectful, paid on time. It was only Marcus making noise, and Lydia caught in his storm. But things changed when I received the quarterly report from the building manager. Attached were photos of Marcus and Lydia's unit. The bathroom had mildew, kitchen tiles were cracked, mail piled up on the floor. They were cutting corners, living lean. I should have felt pity. Instead, I felt clarity. This wasn't just about money, it was about power, and Marcus was losing it fast. Word around the building was he'd started taking on extra hours at his restaurant, working late into the night. Lydia was seen crying on the back steps one afternoon by another tenant, her face buried in her hands. They were unraveling from the inside out, and I didn't have to say a single word. That was the part I kept coming back to. For so long, I was the one begging to be heard. Begging Lydia to see what Marcus was, to see what she was becoming by standing beside him. Now they were choking on their own silence, and I was watching from above. Literally. My new apartment, a floor higher in a different building, offered a view of their courtyard, a view they could never afford. I didn't watch them all the time, just enough to remember that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined the betrayal, that what they did to me deserved consequences. And yet, despite all that, some nights I still found myself sitting by the window, holding my phone, staring at Lydia's last message. Need you. The woman inside me, the mother, still felt a pang. But the woman I had become, she knew this was only the beginning. Has a moment of silent observation ever revealed more than any direct confrontation ever could? I always thought heartbreak came in loud moments. Slamming doors, shouted words, public scenes. But the real heartbreak, I learned, it's quiet. It comes in the form of a voicemail you don't return, a message left unread, the silence stretched thin between you and someone who once called you Mommy. Lydia's calls had stopped. The texts slowed to a trickle, but the damage on her end only seemed to grow. From what I gathered through the building staff, the tension in their apartment had turned into open hostility. Marcus was snapping at everyone, refusing maintenance requests and demanding unnecessary inspections, looking for someone to blame. Anyone but himself. Lydia, I was told, looked like she hadn't slept in days, her movements slow, her eyes shadowed. I didn't rejoice. I didn't celebrate. This wasn't about watching them suffer. It was about something far more painful, watching the daughter I raised willingly stay in a cage and call it love. One afternoon, my property manager sent over a report after a noise complaint. The neighbour downstairs had heard a heated argument, shouting something about losing control, and "This is all your fault." Marcus had stormed out and didn't come back until the next morning. Lydia stayed locked inside the apartment the whole night. Lights off, curtains closed. I waited, not for Marcus, but for her. It took 2 more days, 2 long, aching days. Then, just as the sun was dipping behind the trees one evening, my building's intercom buzzed. "Hi, this is Lydia Vance. I was wondering if my mum lives here." My heart stopped. I didn't answer right away. I just watched the screen, frozen. Then slowly, my finger reached out and pressed the door release. 10 minutes later, a soft knock echoed at my apartment door. When I opened it, she stood there, looking like a shadow of the girl I raised. Pale, makeup smudged, wrinkles in her shirt. She looked 20 years older than she was. We stared at each other for a long moment. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she let out a breath, a quiet, broken sound. "Hi, Mum." I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, hesitantly, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to. Water dripped from her rain-soaked clothes onto my hardwood floor. I handed her a towel, and we moved without speaking. I warmed the kettle and poured 2 mugs of chamomile tea. She sat on the edge of the couch, carefully, like she didn't want to stay long, like she didn't deserve to. And maybe she didn't. She stared into her cup, eyes hollow. "He's not who I thought he was," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I stayed quiet, watching her. I knew. Part of me always knew. But I told myself it was stress, that he just needed support, that if I was patient, he'd come around. Still, I said nothing. She looked up, her voice trembling. "I thought I was doing the right thing back then when we asked you to leave. Asked as if I had a choice. I just wanted to keep the peace. I didn't want more conflict. Marcus said..." She paused, swallowing hard. "He said you'd never leave unless we pushed you. And God, I hate myself for agreeing." I took a sip of tea. The warmth, a quiet anchor in my hands. "I miss you," she whispered, her gaze fixed on her teacup. "But I don't know how to fix it." I studied her face, every line of weariness, every flinch. She was looking for forgiveness, but afraid to ask for it. So I gave her the only thing I could. Silence. Because sometimes, silence is safer than the truth. We sat like that for nearly an hour. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for help. She just wanted to be near me, and I let her. When she finally stood to leave, she reached for my hand. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice raw. "For everything." I didn't say it back. I just held her hand a little longer than she expected. She pulled away first, and then, with tears welling in her eyes, she walked out the door. I didn't cry, but the second the door clicked shut, I sank into my chair, holding the warmth of her teacup in my palms, like a lifeline. She had come. She had looked me in the eye. And now I knew the cracks were finally starting to show. Do you believe that some truths, once spoken, can never be unheard? The thing about power, real power, is that you never have to raise your voice to use it. Marcus, however, was still screaming. Days after Lydia's tearful visit, the apartment building buzzed with his escalating rage. His attempts to uncover Aegis Properties' owner proved futile, our legal shield impenetrable. Neighbors reported arguments, shattered glass. He even sent an anonymous, furious threat. But I was ready, fortifying the building while his world fractured. Lydia, trapped, finally understood her cage. The invitation for a mandatory building meeting arrived on a Tuesday. Upcoming renovations in the common room. I knew Marcus would be there. Desperate for a target, I arrived early, blending into the quiet hum of anticipation, unrecognizable in my charcoal blazer and soft waves. Marcus stormed in, Lydia a shadow behind him, both oblivious to my presence. He marched straight to the property manager, demanding to know the owner's name. I sat silent through routine announcements. Then, the manager paused. "We'd like to thank Aegis Properties for their commitment. The owner is here today should anyone have questions." I stood. The room turned. I walked slowly to the front, calm, steady. Marcus's face twisted in confusion, then disbelief. Lydia's mouth parted in shock. I turned to the room. "Good evening," I said. "My name is Eleanor. I'm the owner of this building." A pin could drop. Marcus lurched forward. "You? This is a joke. What kind of game is this?" I met his panicked gaze. "No game," I said softly. "Just business. You manipulated this. You've been behind this the whole time. You raised our rent. You're trying to ruin us." He hissed. "I gave you a roof. I made improvements. I treated every tenant equally. What I didn't do was forget." I turned to the group. "Any questions about changes can be addressed after." As the meeting resumed, Marcus stood, trembling, furious. Lydia sat, hands clasped, eyes wide. When the room cleared, Marcus lunged. You think you've won? This is nothing. You've made an enemy. No, Marcus, I said, level-eyed. You did, the day you treated me like I didn't matter. Lydia stepped between us. Marcus, stop! He recoiled. What did you just... I said stop, she repeated louder. She's not your enemy. She never was. You are. He looked at her, stunned. Lydia turned to me, trembling. I didn't know, I swear, about the building, the money, any of it. I know, I nodded. Why didn't you tell me? Because you had to see it, not just hear it. Lydia blinked back tears. Marcus scoffed. You two deserve each other. No, I said quietly. She deserves better. I turned and walked away. For the first time since that awful night, I felt power, quiet, firm, entirely mine. Marcus's desperate threats to expose my past met my attorney's swift cease and desist. Records of his harassment, falsified documents, and rants were enough. He panicked. Lydia called 2 days later. He's gone, packed up, left a note saying he was being hunted. Marcus disappeared, a ghost, finally silenced by legal threats and his own fear. Lydia transformed. She moved out, found a studio, started therapy, painted me a phoenix I hung above my fireplace. We talked more. Real, honest. Mr. Goldstein confirmed. The building has officially been transferred. Lawsuit resolved. You are now free to sell. It wasn't just money. It was reclaiming my name, my story, my strength. I sold the building, quietly. Half the proceeds built the Alara House wing at a women's shelter, a tribute to my mother's silent strength. The other half bought a small, charming 2-bedroom in Cedar Park on my childhood street, with oak trees and a porch swing. Lydia helped me move. We sat on the porch swing. I remember riding my bike here, she whispered. You were always safe here, I told her. I forgot how that felt, she admitted. We made grilled cheese, sharing the first real laughter in years. Marcus's chapter was closed. He was a ghost now. That night, watching the moonlight, I said aloud, I forgive you. Not to Lydia, but to myself. I was never the fire they tried to extinguish. I was the spark they underestimated. They taught me silence was weakness, but I learned how to weaponize it. They tried to erase me, and I became someone they could never forget. I tucked a note in my mother's diary for Lydia. You don't need their love to be worthy. You don't need their approval to be strong. You only need the truth, and to never, ever forget who you are. My tea grew cold, but my heart was warm. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to win. I just needed to be who I was all along, and now, finally, I was home. Have you ever found the greatest strength in finding your own voice, even when the world tried to silence you? Let me know in the comments below. Your voice matters. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience and truth.